To those here in the theatre and to those who are joining us virtually, we currently have people online from Indonesia, India, Korea will be joining in, South Africa, the UK and Australia. And we have some apologies from participants in India, Malaysia, Samoa, Fiji, New Zealand, and from Lachlan here at NAFA, and Auntie Rosalind, one of the local elders. I'd like to commence by welcoming everyone to the Australian Festival of Chamber Music, taking place here on the lands of the Wulgurukaba of the Gurrumbulburra and Bindal peoples. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to thank Townsville Enterprises Limited, who are supporting my being here today. We're going to be exploring the idea of the Indo-Pacific New Music Exchange for future years to occur here in Townsville as a proposed gathering of creatives. New music includes contemporary classical music, art music, cultivated and serious music, canonic, and music considered to be of a high aesthetic value. This also includes culturally diverse traditions and new innovations in interdisciplinary experimental sound art practices. There is currently no such platform for new music proponents in either Australia or the broader Indo-Pacific. So today we're going to explore how IPANEME could fill this gap and present new music from our region to national and international presenters and producers. Before we commence this long table session, I'd like to introduce Australian Festival Chamber Music Board member Russell Mitchell to share a few words.
Thanks very much, Teresa, and I join with you to acknowledge the First Nations peoples, the custodians of the land on which we gather. I'm very pleased to be part of this panel representing the board of the Australian Festival of Chamber Music. AFCM is already a great presenter of new music and old music as well. On Sunday night, we saw and heard the 4 works composed over the 3 centuries from 1722 through 1822 and 1922 to 2022. However, these works were essentially based on the usual resources of the Western classical repertoire, although with quite different interpretations. Our repertoire has more broadly been enhanced by occasional contributions from our colleague William Barton, First Nations music, and in recent festivals we've had members of the Silk Road Ensemble bringing a different musical experience to our performances. AFCM is very keen to see how it might contribute to the creation of a broader interpretation of new music that embraces the traditions of our Indo-Pacific neighbours, in addition to seeking a wider First Nations experience and contribution, and we're looking forward to this discussion very much.
Thank you, Russell. Now, as we segue into this long table, what I'd like to do first is to have each of the people who is online to introduce themselves, but to also share how this idea of IPANEME could be a positive engagement for each of you as a way to begin. And for those few people that are here in the room, we invite you at any point to come up to the table and join the long table to share your thoughts and ideas. So if I could head over to our fabulous screen here. On my top left is David Sudamalis from Arts Tasmania.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be joining you from Lutruwita, Tasmania, from the historic lands of the Muwinina and Muwinima people who did not survive British colonisation. And I pay my respects to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. I am presently Director of Arts Tasmania, my role encompassing kind of a position that provides information and perspective to the Tasmanian government around the needs, wants and desires of the arts and movable cultural heritage sector, and reciprocally provides a framework established by the government by way of policy to which the arts and cultural sector may, should they wish, apply for financial and other types of support. Historically, I think Tasmania has been in danger of being excluded from such conversations by the mere fact of what we call the double hop here. It is one hop in terms of getting from Tasmania to the North Island of Tasmania, North Island of Australia, and then a further hop internationally. I think it would do very well for our colleagues who are actively engaged in the music sector to find a way to meaningfully engage in a sustainable, supported, scaffolded way with colleagues in the Indo-Pacific region. There are lots of points of intersection, and there are many points of complementarity. I think this would be an excellent area of international exchange that might even find voice in submissions to, something as relevant as a national cultural policy. I also think that something like IPANEME needs and requires dedicated, committed, insightful leadership, something which is, I think, present in the indefatigable Dr. Peach. Thanks.
Thank you, David. If we could now look at an international perspective on this, Gatot, can I go to you? So Gatot comes to us from Indonesia. Gatot is a composer. So if I can go over to you, Gatot, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and then also add to this conversation? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, greeting from Indonesia. Yeah, I'm a composer and also a sound engineer. So mainly I just working for composing and also organization of archiving and music in Yogyakarta. So I'm stay in Yogyakarta, and also I run a small festival, small contemporary music festival. We call it October Meeting, a festival that's very small. So that's mainly only 3 days. So that's because in our region, the Western music, Western art music is still mainly in the part of education system. But publicly, we have 2 languages, also traditional music, also contemporary based on traditional music, gamelan, Sundanese, and etc. And also Western oriented. So that's we quite diverse community in Indonesia. So that's it's good to share with you guys. That's in terms of Indo-Pacific region. So that's very hopeful to us to be part of you guys. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gatot. Can I now go to Shreya? Shreya joins us from India.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Shreya Nagarajan Singh, and pardon me, I have a slight cough. I'm based out of South India in Chennai, and I run a small arts development consulting firm where we help artists sort of completely engage with their business end of things, because most artists who run companies or who run initiatives or even just manage themselves usually don't have any background in business, right, and how to go about generating revenue and forming sustainable, models of revenue development, but also operations and scaling what they're doing. So that's what we really help them in. I have a background in classical dance and music, and that is probably the reason why a lot of the work that I do is with Indian classical music and dance. And this platform is extremely interesting when I first came across, because we're always looking for meaningful ways to engage. It's very easy to sort of, book a hall and come and present and find a partner, but it's always short-lived engagements. And these sort of, I think, a platform like this one really helps think deeper in terms of how to contextualize, different forms of new music, as well as understanding the different cultural references and how we can meaningfully engage in platforming this work in a way that has long-term impact and has a development, arc, rather than just something short-lived. Thank you for having me, also.
Thank you very much, Shreya. I think there's some really poignant points there too. If we can now go to Bernard Lansky from the Queensland Conservatorium. Bernard, I think you're on mute.
Yep, sorry.
Fantastic.
Thanks, and hi everyone. It's really great to be able to connect here. Wanting to pay respects also to elders past and present from across the state, and seeing that that's one dimension across our entire region of those Indigenous to various communities, and how we can be connecting the musics and art making from all of those communities to be sharing and exploring potentials for commonality and mutual understanding. And I think that's a really important starting point. I actually come from north of Townsville. Not many people come from north of Townsville, I guess, but I'm originally from Cairns. And so for me, this sense of community connection is really important. I think this opportunity for it to be positioned somewhere like Townsville rather than one of the big cities is a really nice representation of the diversity that we would be able to reach out to. And for me, diversity represents strength. A lot of the region is also in a post-colonized state, and I think we need to look at opportunities for reconciliation in terms of the musics we've all shared as part of our now common inheritance, and how we can get those conversations through music to be as strong as possible. My previous role for 15 years was in Singapore, so I've had a lot of, and from Singapore into Southeast Asia, so a lot of recognitions of the extraordinary music making that's coming out from all of those regions. And the point from before that we need to get that musics are mutually valued, and that if we were building out from the 5 music rights from the International Music Council, we'd see there's an opportunity here for all sorts of potential connections. Another group in Queensland I think is really important is those who are first generation, who bring that music into our immediate communities here. And therefore it's not just we connect our nations, but we connect our peoples, and we get our connections to be as meaningful as possible. So I think there's a lot of potential opportunities for creating new music from connections. As some of you know, I was actually up there in Townsville on Friday and Saturday, and I was at a concert that had a bassoon playing with percussion. That was the first time in my life I'd seen bassoon playing with percussion. Fabulous piece, new music. I think we could put many things with other things that have not had music created for them, because it's about the people who make the music rather than the instruments that make the music. So this platform and this potential allows us for opportunities for creating new things, for making new connections, and for making the relationships as strong and meaningful and potentially powerful as possible. Final point, we're all in a pretty similar time zone, and I think that's a really healthy thing for us to be able to connect in. And the world needs our voices to be sharing that there's more in art than is currently being appreciated globally. So this is a really fantastic grouping. And I think Queensland is beautifully positioned to be that link point from New Zealand, Tasmania through to Chennai and up to the north.
Thank you, Bernard. As we jump time zones, I might jump over to Franco, who's currently in South Africa.
Hello everyone and good morning. It's very early in the morning in South Africa, but it's lovely to be here, and thank you for allowing me to also be here and to join in and to listen and to discover. I'm a composer. I live in Pretoria, South Africa, and South Africa has such a wonderful musical culture, such a diverse musical culture. We have such a big range of musical heritage, from indigenous music to experimental indigenous music to very specific genres of South African jazz, and obviously then also the Western classical music. I am mainly a composer and a conductor. I organize the music festivals, and I conduct a choir called the Vox Chamber Choir. And I think planning and talking about a project or a festival like this is very exciting for us, because in South Africa we have a lot of festivals, we have a lot of arts festivals. But none of those festivals are situated around new music, music that perhaps challenges, music that deepens your listening experience. So that is very exciting for me. I live in the capital, Pretoria, and we have beautiful choirs in Pretoria. We have beautiful musicians here, but the creation of new music is very limited because there's no platforms for us to present these new compositions. And being part of something like this is very exciting, because mostly in South Africa, a new composition will only be played once and never again, either by the composer or by the person that commissioned the piece. It will only happen once, and that's such a pity, because then if a composition only happens once, there's no room for conversation, there's no room for connection. And I think specifically that is something I'm looking forward to and would like to open up, to really connect with people and to give people opportunities for discussion and for telling stories. Yes, so I'm very much looking forward to how this develops, and I will be sitting on the edge of my seat. Thank you.
Thank you, Franco. It's so very true, the one-off performance. How do we extend that through a platform like IPANEME? I might just come back to this group here momentarily. I wanted to pick up on William Barton, who's sitting here. William is somebody I have often admired, often programmed in things I've done. He is Australia's foremost globally recognised and respected didgeridoo player, and you do this beautiful thing of bringing what is your tradition in terms of your music and the playing of the didgeridoo and crossing over into working with orchestras around the world.
Hello everybody, how are you out there? Yeah, I'm William Barton, I'm a proud Kalkadunga descendant. Mount Isa is about 1,800 kilometres northwest of Brisbane, or 1,000 kilometres from Townsville, where we are. I grew up there with mum and dad, and you know, having that privilege and that connection with country. And mum would play classical music to me as a child, to dad playing R&B, the old school R&B on the guitar. But then there was that culture as well, like the heavy culture of the language that I identify with the landscape. And so the landscape became a part of, or I became a part of the landscape of the music. And so there are the traditional melodies, but there are also, I guess, in this modern day and age, you know, the reinterpretation of the Australian landscape through the use of the sonic force of a symphonic orchestra, which is very Western. But, you know, I think we're in a beautiful chapter in Australia's musical life where we can nourish and support new commissions and not just get the one-offs as we've been talking about, because that was my goal, some 20 odd years ago, was to take away the tokenistic aspect of just putting an ethnic instrument with the Western Symphony Orchestra, and so I really wanted to drive it home that we have our own music here, our own landscape music of our people, and why not use that and emphasise as an Australian culture moving forward, we can use those classical instruments, because they're of the land as well. A violin is made of wood that's 300 years old or something. It's like, so there's special elements that cross over, and the language becomes a part of that instrument. And I forget who made the comment about the human beings making that collaboration as well, and their open heart, as you are improviser on stage as well. Sometimes, it's about opening up that heart to connect with that person.
Thank you. Visceral. If I come now to Kyle. So Kyle, you sit here as the artistic director of Dance North, who are the major dance company up here in North Queensland. How does something like IPANEME potentially have an effect or a response to a group like Dance North?
I think we are incredibly fortunate to be based in Townsville in North Queensland. So we're closer to Indonesia than we are to Melbourne, and it makes a whole lot of sense that the relationships forged in this region enable a deep exchange and collaboration. And I love that exchange is within the title, and I'm sitting here thinking about exchange, and it really speaks to reciprocity. It speaks to listening. It speaks to offering with a sense of generosity and creating space that connects to place. So if we look at our region here, honouring and acknowledging the myriad cultures that exist within the Indo-Pacific and the incredible opportunities that this region provides for interconnection and interbeing. So I feel like, particularly as we're making our way through the last couple of years and all that COVID has really forced upon us, which is an increased sense of isolation and fear and anxiety, an opportunity to come together and connect around music, which for tens of thousands of years has been such a unifying force, such a celebration of togetherness, whether it's sitting around a campfire or sitting in a concert hall with 1,200 other people, this thing brings us together. And as borders continue to open and mobility becomes more available, I feel like the world is yearning for opportunities like this to come together, to exchange, to share, to listen, and to really celebrate all the most extraordinary aspects of our humanness. And I think music really does anchor something very special within all of us. And as a dance maker, the opportunity to connect with, listen to, and participate in an exchange such as this will undoubtedly seed new and kind of unimagined possibilities and opportunities. And I also love, there have been a few mentions of long time frames. So what does that look like? And maybe it's not a funding cycle of 12 months. Maybe it's a relationship between different partners. Again, back to this word exchange and reciprocity. Maybe there's a 10-year project that emerges. I don't know what are the kind of seeds within this foundation that can anchor something with a long horizon, a long time frame, and really enable new music to connect us in a much deeper way beyond the immediate experience of spending that week or that long weekend or whatever it may be together in the presence of one another. How can those seeds of relationship continue to anchor us for a much longer time as we look to find and seek these deeper opportunities to exchange and connect?
I love the idea of long horizon. I think it's something we don't do in Australia very often, and I think sometimes I find we see the effects of that in the work that comes out, that things just haven't been cooked for long enough. So the idea that IPANEME could become a platform where an exchange occurs between festivals even over a period of time becomes really interesting. And I wonder if that's something that is of interest to some of the people who we have joining us virtually. So I know Gatar has got his small festivals that he does in Indonesia, and whether within that there is actually something there that would be quite beautiful. Something to think about there. If I can now bring into the conversation, we have Tanya here from Arts Queensland. Tanya, how does this look to you from an Arts Queensland perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. Yes, Tanya Hall from Arts Queensland. I'm Executive Director at Arts Queensland, and I'm coming from Meanjin in Brisbane, the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people, so I pay respects to their elders. And yeah, thank you. Look, I think this platform is exciting, and it's been great to listen to the participants already in terms of their considerations and the need for this great deep exchange, if I can steal Kyle's language as well. As some of you may know, and for those who don't, Arts Queensland have had released a 10-year strategy which looks towards 2030, and now with the Olympics announcement, 2032. And I guess there's a clear focus of that particular strategy really on, I guess, engaging a broader audience and developing skills across our sector in Queensland and also Australia, and identifying opportunities that can, I guess, really diversify markets, but also realise innovative practice in music and other art forms as well. And a platform such as this is really key to that. When we're engaging such a diversity of musicians from a variety of different regions across the Indo-Pacific, that enhances the resilience of the sector, and, you know, with those deep relationships really offers, I guess, a unique opportunity for that diversity to come through in the telling of our stories. Especially when we are combining it with the First Nations stories that are so important to Queensland and also to broader Australia as well. And I think that by having these platforms, that enables that, especially when we're looking through to those opportunities of the 2030 Olympics and the Paralympics and the cultural Olympiad that will wrap that. You know, the opportunity to showcase new music that's developed in this region and how it showcases our stories through that music is vital.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, really important. So we do have that wonderful 10-year runway to 2032, and that will provide a lot of opportunity. And with that, thankfully, in the arts comes funding. Because as we know, nothing really happens without that support from our country, our state, and also from our city, which allows me to segue over to our local councillor here in Townsville City. So we're currently in North Queensland. So for somebody looking at a map of Australia, as you get to that pointy top, we're down from that a bit, but quite coastal. And I'll hand over to you, Liam.
Thank you. Yes, hello. I'm Liam Mooney, a local councillor with Townsville City Council. Born and bred Townsvillian, lived in the region, lived in Townsville all my life, and have a big history in classical music and performing arts as well. So perhaps a bit biased here, putting the conflict of interest on record, but I guess from a council point of view as well, one of the big things for us is exchange, and trying to get North Queensland out to the world. And something that we can be helping with that is, you know, we have a very, it was much brought up pre-COVID as everything was, but our Sister Cities program can be expanded exponentially through this, I feel. We've had cultural exchanges in the past. Through Korea, we've had a chef exchange. They've participated in a Taste in the North event back in 2016. Even through some of our other cultural, our other sister cities, we've had tourism and cultural delegations and been invited over to international craft fairs. We've taken Gail Marbo over to show off her artwork, the Jade Holland Band, and I think there was even a local Anne Roberts dance group, but I can't be sure about that. But the point is there is more as a council we can be doing. And I think going on to the Cultural Olympiad as well, I think that's something we should really be kind of grasping, because from a council point of view, you know, the North Australian Festival of Arts wouldn't exist if the Commonwealth Games didn't come to Australia. So that happened off the success of the Commonwealth Games, off the success of Festival 2018. If that didn't happen, NAFA, we wouldn't be having the Empire Theatre here today. So I really think it's about looking onto the horizon and planning further than I think we all think is necessary. So.
Part of me wonders whether there's an opportunity here to develop a work that does have a 10-year horizon, because that would be a wild concept, really. And is there a way to develop that? And this is me throwing ideas out on the table. Is there a way to develop that where all the partners are involved? So it really does become a global project. That would be a really beautiful thing. Russell, Monique, did you want to pipe in on the Townsville, from Townsville Enterprises Limited perspective?
Hi, sorry guys. Thank you for having me. Sorry I can't be there in person. I'm dealing with a few sick children, but I think I just want to echo some comments that everyone else has made. I think it's an incredible opportunity to showcase our regional arts and cultural industry, and also shine a light more broadly on new music and kind of be that place within Queensland, you know, for Townsville to be that place. And I think it's also really important to build on our visitation and make that connection, like Kyle mentioned, through music. So that's kind of all I wanted to add there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Monique. I see that we have Pippa from AsiaLink online. I'd love to hear Pippa's thoughts into this long table, because her and I had a discussion a few days ago when we both briefly met here at the festival. It'd be great to sort of continue that riff a little further, Pippa.
Oh my God, Teresa, where do we pick up on? I don't think we want to share all of that, by the way. Thanks for having me. It was really great to be part of the long table on Friday, talking about the impact of festivals and the arts in regional communities. It's a big focus for AsiaLink's work at the moment. We have really put our thoughts and heads together around what are the barriers for Asian engagement in Australia, where do they exist, why do they exist, and really have identified regional, remote and rural communities as needing support and uplift, because many of the Asian engagement or Indo-Pacific engagement opportunities do tend to bias the major centres and the periphery. So we're looking at a new program called Regional, and we're sort of leveraging our 30-year history of engaging in the region with partnerships and connections and networks to create new collaborations between festival directors and producers from around Australia with their peers in the Indo-Pacific. But I was really interested and inspired, I guess, to hear about Liam's views of what the local government, Townsville Council, are doing, and in looking at some of those sister city possibilities and exchanges, because these exist all around the country, but very few are really activated. They sort of happen on a whim. There might be someone, a councillor, visiting someone somewhere, dare I say, and striking up a new relationship. And then they don't tend to get nurtured and fostered over time. So I think it's a real opportunity for Townsville to activate those sister cities in the region, in the Indo-Pacific. And I think the best type of engagement, any type of global and international engagement, does need that iterative, long-term commitment. Things don't happen overnight, and all of the relationships, even our own in Australia, of course, and our cross-cultural relationships in Australia too, to be frank, rely on trust and those deeper relationships that do take time. Talking to what Kyle is mentioning as well there, I think exchange is a sort of non-linear pathway of really getting to know and working with people. So sort of very key focus for our work. It's all we do. is engagement with Asia. And we've learned a lot and made mistakes along the way, of course, like lots of organisations and people. But I think you've got to start with that real commitment that's going to take time. And unfortunately, short-termism with election cycles and new leaders and that sort of thing really doesn't have a place to play in international engagement. So trying to get this new exchange established in Townsville is going to really require a lot of community leadership too to carry it forward if there are changes in leadership and the like from a governance or government perspective. But I think, you know, it's absolutely, I think everyone in Australia should be enabled to do more Asian engagement. We have a tendency, I feel, across the nation to think, you know, such and such or such and such organisation are doing something, therefore no one else needs to do it, or that box is ticked. And I think, unfortunately, that speaks to a sort of sense of arrogance in Australia, where a country of 25 million people have got this place called Indo-Pacific, where there are in fact 4 billion people who, quite frankly, aren't looking south to Australia that much. So I think we sort of need to release some of that position that we have and really see what we can learn, how we can embed better, how we can make invitation, and really actually understand what hospitality means too, by inviting and hosting and really looking after guests for the region in Australia. So I think you are, Townsville's in a unique position at the beginning of something new to really sort of think about that and create a very strong foundation. So I'm excited by the idea.
Fantastic. Thank you, Pip. Some really important points, I think, raised there. Have I captured everyone who is online, Ricardo? Yes, I have. Fantastic. Ricardo, this was a conversation that began because you came and visited me in Brisbane, and I threw some things on the table and you went, yes, let's do it. So now I'm throwing to you.
Well, it's a very interesting concept, this idea of the Indo-Pacific, because it's very recent. We've had a focus on the Asia-Pacific, but the Indo-Pacific is the kind of the term that emerged quite recently. And for me, why that was exciting is because East Africa and South Africa is part of the Indo-Pacific, and that's where I've just come from. And Nikki is in London. It's very early, so she may still wake up and join us. But if not, I'll talk a little bit about the Pan-African Creative Exchange that we started there to link people up from the African continent and create opportunities for international presenters and producers to come to South Africa, to also to a very small regional town, Bloemfontein, to see and experience the work that was happening from all around Africa. And it was very good that it happened in a small regional town because people could connect to each other very informally. There was no pressure. You could have a coffee and meet, you know, Gregory McCormack from Vuyani Dance and just have a chat, rather than having to make an appointment and, you know, travel miles to meet somebody of his stature. So when I arrived in Townsville, with the Australian Festival of Chamber Music has such an extraordinary reputation, and I wanted to connect to peers in the field of music of this nature, and there was no place for me to go to. There was no network. I may not be aware of it. There might be one, but there was no network for me to go in. How can we, you know, talk and exchange and see what else is happening in Australia? And then when I met Teresa, she said, "Why only Australia? Why not into the region, into the Indo-Pacific?" Because all the other platforms, apart from ATP, I think, is very Australia-focused. APAM is very Australia-focused, and a lot of the networks are very Australia-focused. So this idea of the Indo-Pacific, we started putting it out there, and it became more and more interesting to more and more people. How we've imagined it is that it's a similar platform, say, to APAM or ISPA, the International Society of Performing Arts in New York, IATM, or potentially, I haven't been to Classical Next, but I suspect it's a similar format, where you open up applications, people apply to be part of it, then you invite specific international presenters and producers and festivals to come, And while they're here, they also then engage with the Australian Festival of Chamber Music and all the other things that are happening in town. And the new work that might be emerging or co-productions that people have pitched can then be provided a platform. And now we have a festival garden in addition to the civic theatre, so potentially new work coming in from the Indo-Pacific can be placed within a festival garden setting as well that might not be suited for a proscenium space. So the work that we usually present in a market like this, I didn't want to call it a market, I wanted to call it an exchange because it's about co-productions, it's about networking and new ideas, is you can either have a full production, and that full production could come here and either be presented, in the Civic Theatre or the Ville or in the Festival Garden itself. So you could have a full production that become part of the main programming, depending on the artistic director's vision for that particular year. Or you can then have a work in progress. So it's people who kind of have ideas and they've slightly developed it, but it's not fully developed yet, so you have the work in progress. Or you can have an excerpt, so you have 10, 15 minutes of a fully developed work that people can just quickly see and then kind of develop a sense of it. You can have an itch, where you can have just kind of really kind of at the beginning of an idea and you want to engage others in the room, other companies, other artists to kind of help you co-produce the work as well. So that itch could help. And then you can also, I'm sure we'll have to start a bitch session where you can kind of moan about what's not working and what you want to see happen. But in that space, it's predominantly about networking as well. It's very subtle, and other opportunities open up because you have people here.
Just thinking about that idea of access and equity, one of the great challenges that we often have is the distance. So in terms of artists and creators who are not in Townsville, how could we also imagine this kind of platform potentially in the virtual space as well? Because I feel like that would have to be a part of the conversation so that regardless of where you are, you still have the opportunity to access and be part of this, even in a performative way, in future iterations.
Well, when COVID hit us in South Africa, of course, we had planned the third Pan-African Creative Exchange fully, and suddenly no one could get a bus from Nigeria and come down to South Africa, because that's how people got to South Africa. They hopped on buses. I forgot that there were buses. I kept thinking, oh, no one can make it, and like 300 people turned up. And then what we did, we went online. We had we called it Pace Entangled, kind of networked entanglement, and got everybody online and had a whole program for a week online. But it could also work in a hybrid form like today, because today there are many people watching us on Facebook and on YouTube live, and they're also writing comments. So if they're writing comments, we're going to ask Naomi also to kind of read out some of those comments, because we can engage with people online as well. So I think a hybrid form would be good, but I also think maybe a fund, if we can establish a bit of a fund so that we can find ways of bringing people here. Because the key thing is just bringing people here. You can billet people. We can start a IPANEME campsite if people are not too worried about being in hotels. But whatever works, I think a hybrid form would be probably very good.
Townsville has a reputation of opening up its domestic houses. I believe they did that not that long ago for a major event happening here where they ran out of accommodation and the people opened up their homes.
That was a Townsville Enterprise special. I'll let Monique speak to that one. But no, I think it's a great thing that we do have to do things like that. It's showing how popular our events and our culture is in North Queensland. I would like to see more rooms available at all times. Hopefully that Hilton gets built soon, but
I actually like the idea of people staying in people's homes too, because I think it opens up that connection back to community. It's not as isolating as being in a hotel for a week or longer, which I've experienced on this trip.
Fair enough. Just making a comment on about the whole collaboration via, being able to sit online. I think with the world that we're in already, that's basically already happening with how COVID has pushed us to happen. I know that collaboration happens across countries, especially with one of the things that we've done through sister cities before as well. We've made filmmakers from Townsville have made a brand new feature film when it came out in 2015 with people in the Jiangsu province in China. So it's definitely possible, and I think if we have the right infrastructure for the online is very, very important, because our internet is incredibly fast in Australia. Hopefully we're not lagging too much online, but I think that's something that we could definitely look at, and we are doing already. So
Townsville's looking at its own dedicated link?
Not perhaps that. I mean, sorry, cross collaboration.
Okay, just because there are certain towns now in Australia who are actually feeding in their own cable so that they have unfettered up and download.
There's definitely been talks about that.
Oh, this could be a very interesting space. Whilst we're all taking away here on the table in real, for those who are virtual, is there anyone wanting to add anything at this point? And at the same time, I'd open up to those few people who are sitting here. If, please, by all means. We have people online as well. Fantastic, I got a thumbs up there on Facebook and on YouTube. Are there any comments coming in that we want to throw into the mix? While we're waiting for the online comments, I'm going to head over here.
Okay, my name's Derek Watt. I have not a creative bone in my body, but I have been involved in contemporary music for decades. I go back to helping Frank Callaway bring the International Society of Contemporary Music to Perth in the early 70s, believe it or not. And the one thing that occurs to me is we've been talking a lot about connection. It's more than just connection amongst the practitioners. It's trying to get connection beyond the practitioners. And I think at that stage, one should look at the general society. The thing that has made Australia become multicultural more than anything else is food. The most aggressive Caucasian Australian also is passionate about Indian food, Asian food of all sorts. And it's my suggestion that when you do eventually get a group of practitioners together, you try and do it in combination with people who are bringing food in. So if you want to attract a whole heap of other people, they're not going to be attracted by the latest bit of contemporary music from any culture, but they'll happily indulge in the food from that area, and that's a means of then introducing them to the music and taking it from there. So that's my suggestion.
That's a great suggestion. All the senses should be engaged at all times. We have Auntie Rosalind, who is unable to be here with us today, and was an apology, but she has tuned in online. And she has made a comment here that Townsville hosted the Pacific Festival of the Arts in 1988. It was an amazing time of sharing music, dance, arts and culture. It went for a whole week and a great time was had by all. Thank you, Auntie.
If I may say something about the Pacific Festival. Actually, funnily enough, I'm glad you brought that up. It's showing that, you know, the council's support for events and our event strategy is what is needed, and I'll go into further with that, because we had a First Nations Writers Festival as part of NAFA a couple of weeks ago, and we had legendary Indigenous Australian author and performer Alec Dumaji up here, and he was the one that was hosting it. And one of the big comments that he said, he came from an Aboriginal community in the north of Australia, and he was able to be here for the Pacific Festival back in 1988, and he said just being able to see another culture other than the white man or his family was just mind-blowing to him, and that's what pushed him into the arts. He got to see other people showing off their culture, he got to see other people showing off their art, and that's something that he had never seen before. And I think that proves that this is this is absolutely needed. So thanks for bringing that up, Arnie Roz. That's great.
And I believe Bernard Lansky wants to add in a few more thoughts to the table.
Thanks, Teresa. I mean, it was just some points to share there. I mean, building out of Ricardo's point of other partnerships that are out there. But a particular one, I think, is the intergenerational opportunity. And for example, with some of this hybrid stuff, that the average undergraduate can run a hybrid event, and there's ways of getting teams involved that would be incredibly useful to give extra support for this. The two other points were just a linking point that there's a 30 under 30 initiative in Southeast Asia where we've been looking for 30 musicians under 30 now who will be over 30 in 10 years' time, and who'll be potential future leaders. Some variation of that could actually perhaps energize into this. So just a thought. And just also the Festival Garden, I think it's just such a brilliant initiative there. It's obviously the first year these things take time to settle, but imagine what the mix of communities could be in that space as this began to get going. So there's just three thoughts that came out of some of the presentations there. Great to have all these thoughts emerging, actually. And let's just the point that William made as well about creating from land and creating through improvisation and music making in the moment, rather than it always having to be composed or whatever. I mean, that we're getting people together and sharing resource and seeing what comes up in the moment in that space and on that land could be really beautiful.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bernard. Russell.
Yes, my thinking has been a bit along the last point that Bernard had raised. We talked about works being brought here for others to consider and perhaps exploit. One of the features of the Chamber Music Festival is that a lot of the musicians who come here have never worked together before, and they're put into unusual combinations, as Bernard had mentioned, a bit of the percussion and the bassoon, or in different combinations with people they've never experienced. And out of that, great musical experiences occur and lead to other collaborations beyond the festival that people have continue to work together. And I think it would be very important if we're able to bring musicians, composers from across the region, to have them engage with each other, to see how it's not just an experience of who can take our work and promote it elsewhere, but what can we learn from each other? How might we collaborate to create something new in the process? And that may be a more simpler starting point as well to get. My thinking has been, how do we manifest this? What's the best way of getting this off the ground? And I just wonder whether bringing together musical collaborators in the first instance to get things started and then see what can be built from there might be a way to go.
Yes, it's always interesting, that idea of how do you get something started. Well, I think we've put a mark in the ground by doing today. William?
Hello again, everyone. Just some ideas of, connection again and back to country and these potential exchanges overseas, culturally and even with new modern music, new commissions. I think when you acknowledge the truth and country and the people of the land, that's the first best step. And then the next step, to create this unified connection between black and white people of the land, is finding, for want of a better word, like a slogan or a unified word, like a word or some words that we come up with around the table. And then that is a framework for our friends overseas and in Australia here to make into a musical piece. So what I mean by, I'm just trying to think of the idea what I'm thinking of. One word might be unified, but we find the language word for that particular mob. And then as part of a project with the youngsters, whether they're playing a traditional instrument or non-traditional instrument from that area, they create a piece based on that word. And, it's like acknowledging the four winds, If we know where the journey is going to end or where we want to go, that just helps with the direction and the flow of connectivity. So if we have one word, eagle, what's the word for eagle in Indonesia? Or is it an introduced word? So we find one word, and then that's the power that we go through the system, send it out to the schools and everything. Okay, as part of this a seminar or conference down the track or another thing like this, okay, we have all these kids and they've got this word, eagle, in Australia, Townsville, Indonesia, and they write a piece about that. And they make their instrument, speak like the eagle. And that's just sort of grassroots stuff that I'm just thinking of. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Interesting. Even already playing on the grassroots ideas. I love that. We are about to wind up the session in 4 minutes. So in the last few minutes that we do we have anyone else virtually who wants to put their hand up to make any further comment before I throw back to the panel and those who are sitting in the room? Pip.
Sorry, just a quick comment. I think obviously it's very important to have human and physical connection to place, particularly after the last couple of years. And that should definitely be encouraged. But I would also want to put equal consideration to continuing these online and virtual connections. We did 2 very successful cross-cultural exchanges in music during the pandemic, one with artists in Australia and in China, actually both of them with artists in Australia and China. And, they were tricky for lots of different reasons, but they still had very sort of valid, deep and rich outcomes. And I think also some performative outcomes that were shared and recorded together. So I think I would just put that forward as well, to really invest in the digital capability and connections, because we really don't know what happens with mobility moving forward as well.
It makes me wonder what the food would be like virtually.
There'll be lots of really interesting vocabulary and descriptions, I imagine.
I've just got a question for Franco. Franco, you've been part of one of these kind of exchanges through the Pan-African Creative Exchange. Can you tell us a little bit about what worked, how it helped you, or kind of what you think it could be in terms of a different exchange through the Indo-Pacific?
So the power is out over here. So I'm sitting in the dark because the sun is just coming up here and I have a little candle. So I'm still connected. So I'm happy to still listen to everybody's conversations. I've been part of a few very interesting and successful cross-cultural collaborations in the past 2 years. A very specific collaboration that I think was very meaningful was with 2 Australian artists. And Ricardo, you introduced me to these wonderful artists. We had an online session with the Pan-African Cultural Exchange, and through that I was able to meet people, meet other artists, meet wonderful creators, and specifically with a project that I think was very successful was with my chamber choir, the Vox Chamber Choir, and a project in Australia called Teresa, which was a wonderful kind of data sonification work that was created by capturing data from international space agencies of the magnetic field of the atmosphere. And what a wonderful and meaningful way that was to connect not only with others from me to South Africa and with my chamber choir to Australia, but also with that sense of a greater scheme of things, that wonderful thing being connected to the earth. And what had happened was Michaela Gleave and Amanda created this app called Teresa, which sonifies magnetic data from the Earth's atmosphere into a sound piece that they created. And they used data from specific telescopes all over the world to create that sound piece. And specifically just outside the city of Pretoria, there's a very large telescope called the Hartbeeshoek telescope. I don't know if you guys know the Cradle of Humankind in South Africa. Now that is just, there is this wonderful huge telescope, and they used that data from that telescope to create a soundscape and a sonified data sound work. And we then connected with them, and I composed a chant for my choir, and they performed it live while the sound was generated in a space. And that was a way for us to connect with each other. We didn't need a lot of resources. We didn't need money because there was already an existing sound work, and we could then, as a choir, respond to that. So what I did was I composed a chant for the choir, and it became a discussion. We sang while Amanda and Michaela's sound installation was happening. And that was a very meaningful thing because for an audience, it was a very exciting thing to hear the sound of the magnetic atmosphere, and it was a very captivating film for them because of the nature of the artwork. But also, we could collaborate with each other without having large expenses, and I think that was a wonderful, wonderful project. It's something that we can continue. We can still do that after this one-time performance. So that was just one of the wonderful recent connections I had, specifically with Australian artists and musicians. And I think if we could start out this whole process by getting a way for people to connect with and have musical discussions with, because that piece became a discussion. It was a created piece by two Australian artists, but then we commented on that piece by creating something new. So I just found that very meaningful and interesting, and that could be a way for us to further this concept as well.
Thank you for that input, Franco. It sounds like a fascinating piece of work. We've had Nike, who's just joined us from the UK. Nike is one of the people behind PACE that occurs in Bloemfontein that Ricardo talked about earlier on. Welcome, Nike.
Welcome and good morning, and apologies for the delayed start. Got all my time zones mixed up. Sorry, guys.
No, look, that's great. We are quite close to winding up here, but before we do, I wonder, I know you're aware of IPANEME because we've been talking about it with you for quite some time, and you've certainly been engaged in the discussions to date. Is there anything you'd like to add to sort of the long table discussion that you haven't heard about about this platform and your thoughts on it?
I think in addition to the work that I did, I'm doing with the Pan-African Creative Exchange, I spent like nearly 9 years at the Arts Council England running a showcase platform. And when it was an initiative, it was a short-term initiative for 10 years. And when it wrapped up, the Arts Council realized there was a glaring gap for spaces for artists and people in the cultural and creative industries to meet and connect and discuss, especially from groups from marginalized communities. So I think there's something very powerful about showcasing, and it's that moment. It's a moment where one can present their idea in a safe space to an audience of people who can invest creatively or artistically. And I guess in terms of what we do with PACE, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating what anybody else has said, I didn't catch everything. It's just the last speaker. What we recognize within one of the reasons why PACE was set up was that we recognized that there was a gap in professionalization, that there tended to be a lot of support for capacity development on the African continent. However, much of that capacity development came from donors from outside of the continent. It might have been, cultural agencies or big institutions, and who, of course, had their own agenda. And what we were seeing was there wasn't this long-term commitment and mechanism to really support the growth in a variety of ways of African artists and creatives on the continent, but also artists that are coming from outside of Africa, diaspora Africans, because we see very similar problems with gaps in the UK. And though it might look quite, more polished and pulled together, doing PACE sort of really alerted me to the fact that the challenges that I've seen for artists in running the Showcase for Arts Council are very similar to the challenges I've seen working on PACE. And I guess what I'm saying in a most probably a little bit more of a long-winded way is that the growth has to come with professionalization, and professionalization has to be a commitment. There has to be a space where people can actually meet and connect with a variety of people from within their industries to discuss, to debate, to help come up with standards. And I think that IPANEME there's a good opportunity to be able to do that. I think we've had a lot of success with PACE. We've had a number of organizations and institutions reach out to us and want to partner with us. And I think there's something about not always having to deliver an artistic output, but to be able to be in a process which takes your foot off the pedal a bit. And I think we got to play around a little bit more when lockdown happened. And I think the organizations that I feel that will survive are the ones that understand about collaboration. They understand about how to engage with artists and communities of people within the arts sector who are disadvantaged in a number of ways. It could be disadvantage with data, disadvantage with being a minoritized community, but it's got to be about how you include others in a multitude of ways. I hope that makes some kind of sense, Teresa, but I was trying to paraphrase it together.
Yeah, no, I thought, look, there are certainly points that have been reiterated by others. I'm watching Shreya nod her head as you're speaking, agreeing with so much of what you're saying. So it's all very valuable. We are at that point, though, where we do need to wrap up the conversation for today, sadly. So as we do, I'd like to thank all of you who are online today from around the world. So we have Gaton, who's in Indonesia, Monique, who's here in Townsville, David Sudamalis, who's down in Tasmania, Tanya, who's in Brisbane, Bernard, who's also in Brisbane, Franco in Pretoria, Shreya in India, Pippa, I think back down in Melbourne, isn't it, Pip? Or are you in Sydney? You're in Melbourne, aren't you? Nike, who's joined us from the UK, and all of those who are here and those who are also online, thank you very much. We are going to bring together all of today's thoughts, and we have recorded this session so that we can share it with everyone. And then we will provide all this back to everyone as we continue to develop this platform for delivery in 2023. I'd like to thank the Australian Festival of Chamber Music, the technical and festival team here at the Empire Theatre, DAC Tech, who've so beautifully managed getting us all in virtually, both those online and also those on YouTube and Facebook land. Tourism and Events Queensland, Arts Queensland, the Queensland Government and the Townsville City Council. So thank you very much to everyone for being a part of today's conversation.